made me perk up a little bit is that apparently a couple platoons of Russian soldiers surrendered to the Ukrainians and not after a fight. If you
Wow.
get mass desertions among the Russian soldiers, then we're talking about a very different situation. But this
Hmm.
is one report that has not been confirmed.
Yeah. Okay.
But if you're going to be looking for hope on the Russian side, it'll be in Ukraine, not in Russia. Oh, yeah, no,
Not
I think that's a little simplistic. If
okay.
the United States were to get involved in Ukraine in a real way, that would be the Air Force, that would be the Special Forces, that would be the Army. If we're going to get involved in Ukraine, it's going to be the Navy. It's an island. Yeah, it's just basic military math. I also don't think that the Chinese are itching to go, because if the Chinese did, the war would look very different from Ukraine. So in Ukraine, Russia holds all the mid and long-term advantages here: more
Hmm.
equipment, more men, a self-sustaining system at home. China is 100% dependent upon international trade as maintained by the American-led globalized order.
Right.
And if they try to throw a wrench in that, they lose access, because we'll just put a couple of destroyers out in the Indian Ocean and cut the energy line. 3 months
Hmm.
later, the buses stop running because they run out of fuel. 3 months after that, the power goes out. And less than a year after that, they lose 500 million people to famine, because agriculture is an internationalized trade-based system,
Right.
and all the inputs that allow them to grow their food are not from China.
Yeah. And the communists are out. Okay.
Well,
Yeah.
that's a topic for another day.
Okay, fair enough. It's a long topic. Talk about the economic side of this. I think at least initially we're going to see more easing from our Fed, maybe downward pressure on interest rates. I mean, we've already had that, that it's been just toxic the way it's gone through the pandemic.
I'm not
But
going to comment
yeah,
on the Fed, because the Fed is about to be thrown 1,000 curveballs, and I'm not sure
right.
the Fed has the tools to deal with this, even if we
Okay.
all agreed on what needed to be done. Let me put this from the Ukrainian and the Russian point of view.
Yeah, and agriculture, of course,
Yeah,
because Ukraine is a big exporter and fertilizer and
Russia
so
is
forth.
the
Yeah.
#1 exporter of wheat, and it just invaded the #5 exporter of
Right.
wheat. Ukraine will not plant crops this spring. We have shortages in every kind of fertilizer. Nitrogen, because natural gas prices are up by a
Yep.
factor of 7 before the Russian moves. They're going to go up more. Phosphate, because the Chinese have blocked exports because they're terrified about what's about to happen internally. And 40% of the world's potash comes from Belarus and Russia.
Yeah.
No matter how this shakes out, we are going to have famine, continental in scope, before the end of the year. And this is just the beginning of the unwinding of global agriculture.
So, how many people are you talking about when you
This
say
year, I don't
continental
know, but
scope?
the carrying capacity of the land in a deglobalized world is about a billion and a half less than what we have right now.
Right, which by the way is the subject of your new book coming out, right?
Yes, the
The
whole point of the
deglobalization.
end of the world is just the beginning, is to look at what all the economic sectors look like on the backside of globalization once it's gone.
Right,
So remove all the structures that have allowed us to build and grow to where we are. What happens when they're just not there anymore? And
right.
it's different for every sector. It's different for every region, but agriculture is by far the chapter that gives me the most nightmares.
What you're saying is this conflict right now, the result of it is going to be a continental sized famine for Europe?
Europe's probably okay. Good farmland, good local fertilizer processing. They're going to have some definite problems, but not famine. Let me give you a point of reference. In 2010, there were a bunch of fires in Siberia because they had a really horrible season for
Yep,
ag. And
I
so the
remember.
Russians intervened in markets and prevented exports from their part of the world for a few months. Global wheat prices doubled. Global wheat prices tripled in some of the places that used to rely on Ukrainian, Kazakh, and Russian wheat. And that triggered a series of uprisings and coups and wars that we now know as the Arab Spring. And that was from a partial disruption, not a complete
Yeah.
disruption. And that had nothing to do with fertilizer. Fertilizer just flowed fine.
Hmm.
What we're dealing here is at least a factor of 6 bigger than that.
Wow. We're already experiencing very significant inflation.
Yeah, and if
So,
you look at the countries that have really expanded their agricultural footprint of late, Western Australia, Brazil, they do it all with imported inputs. They're just not there right now.
that's
It's
pretty
very
scary
scary.
stuff. What else can you tell us about the economic impact?
oil and gas, oil and gas, oil and gas. I mean, I realize that's a little
Meaning
redundant,
up,
but
up, up, right?
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to lose the world's second largest exporter of oil and largest exporter of natural gas,
Mhm.
because no matter how this war goes, either the Russians are going to use it as leverage, or the Ukrainian partisans are going to go after the infrastructure, or the Turks aren't going to let it through the Turkish Straits because they've activated the Montreux Treaty, or the Europeans are going to do sanctions, or the Americans are going to. No matter how this goes down, Russia stops shipping energy west.
Yeah. What would you say about our policy with the current administration, with the Biden administration here, that has really attacked energy, in favor of green energy? Has that put our energy security at risk?
The United States is still a net exporter by a significant margin. We export over 3 million barrels a day of refined product. So while I'm not exactly thrilled with some of the things the Biden administration has done on energy policy, he'd have to do a whole lot more damage
Okay.
to actually impact the bottom line. My concern moving forward is that in a world where the Russians cease to be a player and oil prices skyrocket because it's a globalized market, the US president has the power granted by the 2015 Energy Omnibus Bill to end American energy exports with the stroke of a pen,
Hmm.
which means that we'll be fine.
Yeah.
But then the world would lose access to American energy and Russian energy at the same time. And now you're talking wartime shortages everywhere else.
And that would concern me, that they would be very pressured to get energy, and they would get it any way they can. And that means they would
And
break
that's
the
where
treaty.
everything else breaks. That's one of the ways everything else can break down very
Yeah,
quickly.
yeah, it really is. Peter, I know your time is very limited, and we're going to have you back in about 2 months, I think, when your book launch happens. Can't wait to talk to you about more normal stuff then, hopefully. But is yeah,
I hate to ruin it, but it's not going to get any more
it's not
normal
going to
than
be
it is
more
now.
normal by then. Yeah, I know. Wishful thinking, wishful thinking. What else do you want to say as you wrap it up? Anything I didn't ask you, or just anything you want to tell us?
I would just add that the first three books, Accidental Superpower, Absent Superpower, Disunited Nations, there's big fat sections on all of them on Russia and the Russian-Ukraine conflict in general. Any book sales that are made between March 1 and May 31, every cent of my royalties are going to Ukrainian charities to help with medical needs of the refugees and the people who
Great.
decided to stay behind.
That's great. That's awesome. And Peter, give out your website.
www.zeihan.com. Feel free to sign up for the newsletter. It's free. It will always be free.
The newsletter is great, and you've got some great YouTube content out there as well. Peter Zeihan, thank you so much for joining us. Appreciate